So today, we're going to go way back in time and contemplate the story of Jephthah in the book of Judges. This book chronicles the victories, the trials, and the tribulations of the Hebrew people after they took possession of the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua. Israel was not governed by kings yet. God was supposed to be the king. After their initial conquering of the land, the Israelites became soft and complacent, forgetting their legacy and their duty to God. They became involved with idolatry, with foreign gods, and were degraded by the ways of the pagan world they were surrounded with. In their degenerated state, God would remove his blessing, and they would be conquered by their pagan neighbors. And after years of torment and deprivation, they would again turn to God for relief. He would hear their cries, send a deliverer, or judge to reconquer the land, and they would regain their independent state. This cycle was repeated 6 times as the people never learned the lesson that God continually put before them. The Lord is the sovereign. He is to be first and foremost in our lives. The book ends with this remarkable sentence. Judges chapter 21, verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This sounds like the mantra that is shouted from the rooftops in our own era. The exhortation to do your own thing, to be your own person. If it feels good, do it. We would be well to heed the lesson taught in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead begot Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall have no inheritance in my father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob. And worthless men banded together with Jephthah and went out raiding with him. This chapter begins with Jephthah being described as a mighty man of valor. But the very next phrase describes his illegitimate birth to a woman of ill repute. As we will see, Jephthah's status as a bastard child did not deter God's use of him, but it sure made a difference to the family and to the people with whom he lived. Evidently, the hatred and ill will shown to Jephthah finally drove him away, and he became a bandit in the wilderness. I'd like to take a pause here in the storytelling to reflect on the outcast status of our subject. Here was a man, through no fault of his own, separated from family and home, hated and reviled for something he had no control over. I would wager that if we were truly honest with ourselves, we could all identify with being on one side of this story or the other. Persecuted like Jephthah, and being like one of Jephthah's persecutors. How many families and friendships have been riven by things that were really no one's fault, or torn apart by petty jealousies or imagined insults? We all need to learn to see like God sees, to be quick to forgive and slow to condemn. Judges chapter 11, verses 4 through 11. It came to pass after a time that the people of Ammon made war against Israel. And so it was, when the people of Ammon made war against Israel, that the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. Then they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander, that we may fight against the people of Ammon." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That is why we have turned again to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the people of Ammon, and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you take me back home to fight against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivers them to me, shall I be your head?" And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be a witness between us if we do not do according to your words." Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. The previous chapter in Judges, chapter 10, describes the predicament of the Israelites. Because of their apostasy, God had allowed the Philistines and the Ammonites to harass and oppress Israel for 18 years. And now Ammon was coming to make war and subjugate them completely. Israel had no war leader. Jephthah must have made a reputation as a great commander for his years as a raider in Tob, because that's where the elders went to find their general. Think of the parallels here with the stories of Joseph, Moses, and David. All of these men had been outcasts and spent long periods of their lives in the wilderness. God used those times to teach them to where their strength truly resides and to prepare them for the trials to come. Jephthah went through similar circumstances, and he was ready when he was called by God. Psalm 82, verses 1 through 4. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. The elders of Gilead and Jephthah's own brothers had really done Jephthah wrong. It must have been very humbling for these elders when they sought out Jephthah for his service. It reminds me of the story of Joseph being reconciled to his brothers, and reflect on the relationship between Jephthah and the Gileadites. It resembled the relationship between Israel and God. God and Jephthah had both been cast out because they were thought to be unworthy or unneeded. And now, in a time of trouble, they were being asked to come and save. Think of the irony here. Israel, who had played the harlot with foreign gods to get themselves into this trouble, sought out the harlot's son, whom they had banished, to be their leader. Their deliverer would be the bastard Jephthah that they had sent into exile. When God is exiled from our lives, we invite a whole host of trouble and tribulation. How many people in this world ignore or disdain God until disaster strikes and they all come running? On the same note, we should make no man an enemy, because someday we may need a friend. Jephthah wisely demanded headship over Israel in addition to the command of the army, so they couldn't exile him again after he won a victory for them. And God's hand was in it all. Take heart when you are slighted or rejected. Leave it to God to make your light shine. The text says that Jephthah spoke all his words before God in Mizpah. He went before the Lord and acknowledged him first and foremost. Jephthah started with prayer. That is where any wise man or woman would begin a new enterprise, on his knees before God. This shows a man acting out his faith, a man who knows where his strength comes from. Jephthah is starting his new job in the right way. Judges chapter 11, verses 12 and 13. Now Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon, saying, "What do you have against me, that you have come to fight against me in my land?" And the king of the people of Ammon answered the messengers of Jephthah, "Because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from the Arnon as far as the Jabbok, and to the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore those lands peaceably." Jephthah again shows his character in how he approaches the Ammonites. This mighty man of valor tried to resolve the matter first by peaceful means. He asked them what the issue was, why they were threatening the Israelites with destruction. He wanted their point of view. Maybe an accommodation could be made if they truly had a case. We should always seek justice by peaceful means. The sword should always be the last resort. The Ammonites claimed that Israel had stolen some of their land and they wanted it back. Then Jephthah gives them a history lesson to remind them how the Israelites had come into possession of the land. The Amorites, not the Ammonites, had possession of the disputed territory when Moses came upon it during the 40 years the Israelites spent in the wilderness. Moses had asked permission to pass through the land, but the Amorites refused to give him passage, and they assembled an army for war. The Lord delivered the Amorites into Moses' hand. They were defeated and destroyed, and the Israelites had held possession of the land ever since. If the Lord had given the land to Israel, why should Israel give it up? The Ammonites had 300 years to make a claim. Why did they wait until now? Then Jephthah laid the issue before God and asked him to render judgment between the Ammonites and the Israelites. The king of the Ammonites did not heed Jephthah's words, and the war was on. Judges chapter 11, verses 29 through 32. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced toward the people of Ammon. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, "If you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering." So Jephthah advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them. And the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he defeated them from Aroer as far as Minnith, 20 cities, and to Abel Keramim with a very great slaughter. Thus the people of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. God now fills his chosen Redeemer with the Holy Spirit so that he can take on the task of saving Israel from the Ammonites. Jephthah passes through the territory of Israel and gathers an army. Once his army is gathered, he turns his face toward the Ammonites for war. But before he engages the enemy, Jephthah feels compelled to make a vow before the Lord. Grant me victory, and I will offer up as a burnt offering the first thing that comes out of my house when I return in peace. As we will see, this vow would cost Jephthah dearly. What is it in the human psyche that makes us think we need to negotiate with God in order to receive his blessing? Does God need anything from us that he doesn't already have? The Lord had filled this man with his Spirit, assembled a great fighting force for him, and Jephthah still thought that he had to do something in order to seal the deal. Did it come from a lack of faith? That he needed to entice God in order to receive the victory? Or did it come from a place of personal pride? That Jephthah wanted recognition for his own prowess or his own goodness? God did not ask for anything from Jephthah. All he wanted was Jephthah's obedience. Jephthah's vow, made in the heat of the moment, was rash and unthinking. Remember Jephthah the next time you feel the need to negotiate with God, Christian. Jephthah and his army then took on the Ammonites and soundly defeated them with a great slaughter, drove them from the land, and peace and sovereignty were restored to Israel. Judges 11, verses 34 through 40. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing. And she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass, when he saw her, that he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it." So she said to him, "My father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon." Then she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I." So he said, "Go." And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her which he had vowed. She knew no man. And it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. And who was the first person to greet Jephthah when he returned to his home after his great victory? His one and only daughter. Being the father of a daughter that I dearly love and treasure, I can only imagine how quickly Jephthah's elation and celebration of his great victory turned to anguish and grief and a huge sorrow. It's also indicative of his own pride that he placed the blame on her instead of owning up to his own carelessness that had produced this great dilemma. Verse 35, again. And it came to pass, when he saw her, that he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. It was Jephthah's pride that would not let him rectify a terrible situation. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 2 through 5. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few, for a dream comes through much activity. And a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Jephthah had been rash, but he still felt compelled to pay his vow. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 25. It is a snare for a man to devote rashly something as holy, and afterward to reconsider his vows. As we see from this verse, Jephthah was not the first one to fall into this dilemma. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 21 through 23. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. Surely, Jephthah was familiar with the law. The law specifically states that God will surely require you to pay your vow, or it would be sin. You voluntarily make a vow before God, you must keep what has proceeded from your mouth. As James says, our tongue can get us into more trouble more quickly than anything else about us. Oh, that we'd all heed that proverb. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. There are some Bible scholars who say that Jephthah had no choice here. He had to fulfill his vow to God because the law required it. There's another camp that says he should have renounced his vow, and that's where I have landed. Two wrongs never make a right. A man's vow cannot overrule a commandment of God. The commandment here is the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. God is the sovereign, not the vow of a man. If the vows of man could supersede the law of God, there would be no hope for us. And Jephthah's daughter here is innocent in the matter. She had done nothing to deserve death. I think Jephthah's daughter is the heroine of the story. I would like to know her name. Her love for her father and her devotion to the Lord are evident in the way she handled the bitter pill that she was given by the circumstances that were thrust upon her. She did not try to reason or to plead her way out of the sentence, and so by doing kept the fifth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. Numbers chapter 30, verses 3 through 5. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand, and the Lord will release her, because her father overruled her. Fathers have an authority over their unmarried daughters. This authority is passed on to the woman's husband when she marries. Now, this is a godly authority. It has to do with headship. A father must administer this authority with wisdom, gentleness, and most of all, love. Jephthah's daughter recognized and respected the headship of her father and willingly submitted to it. If Jephthah had submitted to the headship and authority of God, I believe there would have been a better result. The daughter had just one request, that she would be able to bewail her virginity for 2 months before her sentence to be carried out. She was Jephthah's only child. Her death would mean the end of Jephthah's line, and this seemed to be her biggest concern, not just the end of her life. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 28 and 29. Nevertheless, no devoted offering that a man may devote to the Lord of all that he has, both man and beast, or the field of his possession, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted offering is most holy to the Lord. No person under the ban who may become doomed to destruction among men shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. So, at the end of 2 months, the daughter returns, and Jephthah does what he feels he is compelled to do by the law. And every year, the daughters of Israel would gather and lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 30 through 34. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah. Also of Samson and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Let's not be too hard on our brother Jephthah. After all, he was a man of flesh and blood and clay feet, just like us. To his credit, he is mentioned here in the list of heroes in Hebrews 11, the men and women of great faith, and through that faith accomplished great things for the kingdom. Remember the sin of David, when he took another man's wife and then had him murdered. What about the great vow of Peter, never to leave nor forsake his Lord, and then denying even knowing him at his hour of his greatest need? Yes, Jephthah failed at one point, but we all fail at one point or another. And it's the grace of God that forgives us and uses us in spite of ourselves. Jephthah had a tough upbringing, and who knows what he had to deal with when he was a renegade in the land of Tob. Nevertheless, God called him, and he answered, and he accomplished a great thing. Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. We will let our Lord have the last word here. This passage is from the great teaching of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. And leave the rest to the sovereign King. Amen? Biff, please hand out the elements. I'm going to close with Psalm 4. Hear me when I call, O God, my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long, O you sons of men, will you turn my glory into shame? How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? But know that the Lord has set apart for himself him who is godly. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in my heart, more than in the season that their grain and wine increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety.